When the CEO mocks him for speaking up about an idea for a failing product line, the friend quietly retreats. Before we begin, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and let's dive into a world where truth and betrayal dance together. Ready? Let's begin. The morning air was crisp as Joe pulled up in his battered delivery van, the rusted sides rattling like old bones. Parked in front of the towering headquarters of Keston Industries, Joe glanced at the gleaming glass facade that stretched upward, a monument to modern commerce. Beside him sat Liam, hunched over, his shoulders stiff beneath a worn denim jacket. Joe, always the chatterbox, had been urging Liam to come along for the ride, promising it would be good for him to get out of his apartment and breathe in the bustling city air. But Liam's eyes were cast downward, his mind elsewhere. In the van's cramped cab, the hum of the engine was the only sound, each vibration a low echo of the dread that coiled in Liam's gut. As they walked into the sprawling lobby, Joe's easy grin greeted the security guard who barely glanced at Liam's pale face. Inside, polished marble floors reflected the overhead lights, and the aroma of fresh coffee wafted from a nearby cafe. Joe balanced a stack of parcels in one hand, his practiced routine unfolding as he navigated the gleaming halls. Liam trailed behind, his eyes catching on every detail: polished brass elevator doors, a receptionist with a headset that glowed blue, the hum of hushed conversations from behind frosted glass doors. Joe's voice broke through Liam's thoughts. "Stick close, buddy. This place is a maze." Liam nodded, clutching a clipboard as if it were a lifeline, each step feeling like he was intruding on a world he'd never been meant to see. The two men approached a set of double doors etched with the words, "Boardroom A," the muffled voices of power and authority leaking through the wood. Joe, always the one to see opportunity in even the smallest cracks, paused. "You know, Liam, they're talking about that new product line in there. Word is they're in deep trouble." Liam shifted on his feet, his curiosity momentarily overcoming his discomfort. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice low. Joe shrugged. "It's all over the news. Their flagship product is getting stomped by the competition. They're desperate for a fix." Liam's brow furrowed. He'd spent hours reading trade journals, tinkering in his cramped apartment, dreaming of ideas that never left his sketchpad. An idea sparked, bright and sudden. Before Liam could speak, the doors swung open and a suited executive in polished Italian leather shoes stepped out, nearly colliding with them. "Watch it," the man snapped, his eyes flitting dismissively over Liam. Joe apologized quickly, the delivery hand's instinct to make himself small in the presence of power. Liam, though, felt the flicker of an idea slip back into the shadows, the man scorn a bucket of ice water. But Joe, ever the optimist, saw a chance. "Hey, Liam here has some thoughts on how to fix that product," he blurted out, his voice a bit too loud in the hushed corridor. Liam's eyes widened, panic rising in his throat. Inside the boardroom, the laughter was sharp and swift, a chorus of expensive suits and manicured nails tapping on polished oak. Mr. Weller, the CEO, regarded Liam with a faint smirk, the kind of expression that said he'd already measured this soft-spoken stranger and found him wanting. "And who are you, exactly?" he asked, his voice a blade of condescension. Liam swallowed hard, his hands gripping the clipboard like a shield. I'm just a friend. But I think, if you adjusted the flow valve on your core unit, you could reduce the heat buildup by nearly 20%. It would extend the lifespan of the unit and reduce energy costs." A hush fell over the room. For a heartbeat, it felt like the world had stopped spinning. Then the laughter resumed, colder this time. One board member, a woman in a sharp navy suit, rolled her eyes. "That's cute," she said, her voice dripping with scorn. "Leave the engineering to the professionals." Mr. Weller leaned back in his chair, his smirk deepening. "We appreciate your enthusiasm, but we're handling it." Liam nodded stiffly, the heat in his cheeks a burning brand of humiliation. Joe shifted uncomfortably, realizing he'd misjudged the room's appetite for input from a stranger in a delivery van. The meeting moved on without them. Liam and Joe stood in the hallway, the echo of dismissive laughter ringing in their ears. Liam's heart pounded in his chest, a drumbeat of shame and buried fury. He mumbled an apology to Joe, but Joe just clapped him on the shoulder. "Don't worry about it, man. These suits wouldn't know a good idea if it bit them in the nose." But Liam's mind was already elsewhere. His idea, half-formed and fragile, refused to be snuffed out. He clenched his jaw, feeling the shape of it in his mind's eye. A tweak here, an adjustment there, and it would be perfect. The two men left the building, the cold morning light blinding after the sleek, artificial glow of the boardroom. Joe tried to lighten the mood, cracking jokes as they loaded the van, but Liam barely heard him. In his head, the schematic was already taking shape, lines and curves, pressure points and tolerances, the math of possibility. By the time they reached the freeway, the laughter from the boardroom had faded, replaced by a fierce, quiet determination. Liam didn't say much, but his silence was heavy with purpose. That night, he would take his idea out of the shadows and see if he could turn quiet brilliance into undeniable proof. That night, the city outside Liam's apartment was a blur of neon signs and the low hum of traffic. Inside, his small one-room sanctuary looked like a workshop caught between dreams and disarray. The floor was a patchwork of blueprints, crumpled paper, and half-finished models. Shelves bowed under the weight of rusted tools and scavenged parts, old laptop batteries, a cracked screen that still flickered to life when he jiggled the wires just right. In this cluttered chaos, Liam found comfort, a world where he could build something no boardroom could dismiss. He sat at his battered desk, the glow of his ancient monitor casting shadows across his face. The idea he'd offered in the boardroom, half-formed in his mind earlier that day, had blossomed into a blueprint he couldn't stop seeing. Every angle, every component, every potential flaw, it played in his head like a symphony of possibility. He clicked away at the 3D modeling software, the rhythmic tap of keys punctuating the silence. His fingers moved with certainty, each keystroke etching his idea into reality. The screen was a mosaic of possibilities, lines and curves he coaxed into precision. Liam's eyes burned with focus. He barely noticed the chill seeping through the cracked window or the growl of his stomach, forgotten hours ago. His mind was a hive of calculations, each one pushing him closer to the breakthrough that had felt so distant just that morning. He muttered under his breath, a litany of numbers and equations, each one a prayer to the gods of innovation. The soft glow of the computer screen painted his gaunt features in electric blue, but the tired lines around his eyes only sharpened his resolve. In the faint hum of his ancient desk fan, he could almost hear the laughter of the boardroom again. The scorn in their voices, the smirks on their polished faces. But here, in this tiny room, their dismissals meant nothing. Here, he was free. He scribbled notes in the margins of a spiral notebook, cross-referencing specs he'd memorized long ago. His pencil moved like a conductor's baton, guiding the orchestra of his thoughts into harmony. He didn't know if they'd ever see this work, if it would ever matter beyond these four cracked walls, but he refused to let that possibility silence him. Hours slipped by, the city's night shifting toward dawn. Liam's hands ached, and his eyes stung from the glare of the monitor. Still, he pressed on. Each line on the screen was a step forward, each calculation a blow against the laughter that had tried to belittle him. At last, as the first gray light of dawn crept across the window pane, he leaned back in his chair and exhaled a slow, steady breath. Before him, the finished model glowed, a sleek, elegant design that was more than an idea. It was a solution. The modification was simple but transformative, a tweak to the flow valve that would ease the heat strain and extend the product's lifespan. Liam stared at the design for a long time, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. He could see it clearly now, how it would fit into the failing product line, how it would silence the competition and breathe life back into a company that had laughed in his face. He knew it wouldn't be easy. They dismissed him once. They'd probably dismiss him again. But this wasn't about them anymore. It was about the idea, and about proving, to himself most of all, that he was worth more than a clipboard and a delivery van. His stomach rumbled, a hollow echo of a night spent lost in work. He pushed away from the desk and crossed to the tiny kitchenette in the corner, filling a chipped mug with water. As he sipped, he glanced at the city through the grimy window, the streets bathed in the soft glow of sunrise. Somewhere out there, Joe was probably already loading the van, ready to face another day of deliveries and small talk. Liam felt a pang of gratitude for his friend's optimism, for the push that had put him in that boardroom, however humiliating it had been. Wiping his mouth with the back of his hand, he set the mug down and returned to his desk. He saved the file under a new name, L-Flow Optimization V1. It wasn't fancy, but it was his. He stared at the name for a long moment, then clicked to export the schematic as a PDF. His mouse hovered over the send button in his email, his heart pounding in his chest. He hesitated, doubt whispering that he was a fool, that he'd only be laughed at again. But he clicked send anyway, firing the file into the generic info@keston.com inbox. It was a shot in the dark, but it was his shot. Exhaustion tugged at him then, a wave of fatigue that blurred the lines on the screen. He leaned back in his chair, the weight of the night finally settling into his bones. As he closed his eyes, he pictured the design again, the clean lines and the promise it held. He didn't know if he'd ever hear back. He didn't know if they'd even open the email. But for the first time in months, Liam felt something stir in his chest, hope. Quiet, but insistent. A spark of genius that refused to be snuffed out. A few days later, Liam's small apartment felt even smaller as he waited in silence, the weight of doubt hanging over him like a storm cloud. The schematic he had sent to Keston Industries sat in his outbox, no reply, no sign it had been seen or acknowledged. Liam tried to focus on other projects, little fixes and tinkering with old radios that didn't matter to anyone but him, but his mind kept drifting back to that email. Like a tiny bottle floating on an endless ocean, its message lost in the waves. Joe swung by one morning, his usual grin faltering when he saw the dark circles under Liam's eyes and the twitch in his fingers from too much coffee and too little sleep. "Hey, you all right?" Joe asked, dropping a sandwich wrapped in butcher paper onto the cluttered table. Liam managed a half-smile, but his shoulders slumped. "I'm fine. Just waiting." Joe nodded, understanding more than he said. He patted Liam's shoulder, his hand warm and solid. "You did your part. That's more than most people ever do, man." Liam nodded, but he didn't feel the comfort he wished he could. The next day, Joe had another delivery to Keston Industries. He tried to talk Liam into coming along, but Liam shook his head. "I'll just be in the way," he said softly, his voice barely rising above the whir of the old fan in the corner. Joe left alone, the weight of his friend's disappointment following him down the stairs. As he drove into the city, he thought about all the times Liam had fixed things for him. Watches, radios, even the engine of his van when it sputtered and threatened to die. It didn't seem fair that a mind like that could be dismissed so easily. At Keston's headquarters, Joe made his usual rounds, dropping off parcels and collecting signatures. He didn't expect anything to be different. But as he entered the main lobby, he caught a flicker of movement in the corner of his eye, an assistant rushing down the hall, clutching a sheaf of papers with a look of panic. The name, L-Flow Optimization, was scrawled across the top page in Liam's precise handwriting. Joe's heart thumped in his chest as he realized what he was seeing. They'd opened the email. They were looking at Liam's design. Joe finished his deliveries, but his mind was elsewhere. As he approached the main conference room, Boardroom A, he could hear raised voices inside, sharper than usual. He paused. The door cracked open just enough for him to see inside. The board members sat around the table, Liam's schematic projected onto a massive screen at the far end. Mr. Weller was pacing, his brow furrowed as he gestured at the image, the room filled with the tense energy of men and women who knew they were standing on the edge of something big. One of the engineers, a man Joe recognized from previous trips, thin, with horn-rimmed glasses and an air of perpetual skepticism, was pointing out aspects of the design, his tone grudgingly respectful. "This modification addresses the core problem we've been wrestling with for months," he said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "It's not just a patch, it's a complete solution." Another board member leaned forward, her voice tight. "But who sent it?" This email was anonymous. "We can't build an entire product line around a mystery." Joe's pulse quickened. He knew exactly who had sent it, and he knew that if Liam wasn't there to claim it, someone else would. He didn't wait to finish his delivery route. He practically ran back to the van, his mind racing. The city outside seemed brighter, the roar of traffic and chatter of the streets filling his ears like the promise of something bigger. Joe dialed Liam's number as he fumbled with the keys, his breath coming in quick bursts. "Liam," he said as soon as his friend picked up, "they're using it. Your design. They're talking about it right now." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line, then a quiet, incredulous "what?" Joe didn't waste time with details. "You need to come down here. Right now. If you don't claim it, they'll act like it never came from you." Liam's voice wavered. "But what if they don't believe me? What if they just laugh again?" Joe's voice hardened, a fierce edge that rarely surfaced. "Then let them try. You've got the proof. You've got the mind that built it. Don't let them take it from you." He paused, then added, more gently, "You're not the same guy they dismissed. Show them that." Liam hung up without another word, his heart pounding as he grabbed the worn backpack that held his notes, the rough sketches that had grown into the design they'd projected on that big screen. He felt the tremor in his hands as he zipped it shut, but he didn't let it stop him. He took one last look at his cluttered apartment, his safe space, his refuge, and then he was out the door, the determination in his chest burning brighter than the morning sun outside. As Liam made his way through the crowded streets, he rehearsed what he would say, how he would stand tall even if his voice shook. In his mind, he saw the polished faces of the board members, the hard glint in Mr. Weller's eyes. But he didn't see their laughter this time. He saw their silence, the moment when they realized the quiet man in the corner was the only one who could save them from the storm brewing outside their glass walls. And with every step, his shoulders straightened a little more, his voice in his head growing stronger. Today, he wasn't just the soft-spoken friend of a delivery driver. Today, he was the man with the idea that would change everything. Liam arrived at Keston Industries just as the sun reached its peak, the glass windows of the towering building reflecting the brilliance of the sky. He paused outside, his breath catching as he stared up at the symbol of everything that had laughed him away. For a moment, doubt clawed at the back of his mind. The memory of that first dismissal, the weight of voices telling him he didn't belong. But then he felt the blueprint in his backpack, the embodiment of countless nights spent turning dreams into possibilities. He drew in a slow breath, the air filling his lungs with a quiet resolve. Inside, the lobby was bustling with activity, executives moving with clipped urgency, assistants ferrying coffee, and reports like lifelines. Liam's steps echoed in the marble halls, the noise around him a blur of color and motion. He approached the receptionist's desk, the woman behind it regarding him with polite disinterest. "Can I help you?" she asked, her fingers poised over the keyboard. Liam swallowed his nerves. "I'm here to see Mr. Weller. My name is Liam Carver. I believe he's expecting me." She blinked at him, surprise flickering across her face. "Mr. Weller's in a board meeting right now," she said. "I don't have an appointment for you." Liam nodded. "Tell him it's about the schematic for the L-flow optimization. He'll understand." Her eyes widened slightly, but she picked up the phone. Minutes later, Liam stood in the hallway outside Boardroom A, his backpack clutched tight against his shoulder. Through the narrow glass panel, he could see the room beyond, Mr. Weller at the head of the table, the board members leaning forward, their expressions a mix of intrigue and wariness. The schematic he'd sent them glowed on the massive screen, the same lines and curves he'd painstakingly built in the solitude of his apartment. His heart thudded in his chest, but he felt the tremor in his hands still as he watched them. This was his work, his vision, and he was done hiding. The door swung open, and an assistant gestured him inside. The room fell silent as Liam stepped in, the quiet heavy as he met the eyes of the men and women who had laughed him away. Mr. Weller's gaze was sharp, his mouth a thin line. "Mr. Carver," he said, his voice measured. "I understand you have something to say." Liam took a slow breath, his palms damp against the straps of his backpack. "I do," he said, his voice low but steady. "The design you're discussing, it's mine. I sent it to you because I believe it can save your product. And I'm here because I want to see it built." A murmur ran through the room, but Liam didn't flinch. He walked to the edge of the table, pulling out his laptop from the battered bag and placing it in front of them. "This isn't just a theoretical adjustment," he said, his fingers flying over the keys as he pulled up the 3D model. "I've tested it. I've run the numbers, and I can show you exactly how it works. Your core unit isn't failing because of bad design. It's failing because it's not evolving. My modification gives it the breath it needs to survive." He clicked to expand the model, the smooth lines rotating on the screen in the room's soft glow. For a moment, there was only silence, no laughter this time, no dismissive scoffs. Mr. Weller leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "You're claiming authorship of this?" he asked. Liam met his gaze. "Yes. I'm not here to ask for charity or a handout. I'm here to partner with you. You can't build this without understanding how it works, and no one understands it better than I do." The room seemed to draw in a collective breath, the tension crackling like electricity in the air. One of the engineers cleared his throat, his voice hesitant. "I've reviewed this schematic," he said, glancing at Liam. "It's sound. It's more than sound, it's brilliant. But you're an outsider. How do we know you're not just some hobbyist who got lucky?" Liam's eyes didn't waver. "Because I've spent every hour of every day for the last 3 years working on problems like this," he said quietly. "Because this isn't a hobby for me, it's a lifeline. And because the only reason you're talking about this now is because I didn't let you bury it in that inbox." Mr. Weller's lips tightened, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Respect, maybe, or the dawning realization that they'd nearly let something extraordinary slip through their fingers. "You understand what you're asking," he said. "If we bring you in, you'll be part of this company, part of this project. And if it fails—" Liam cut him off, his voice firmer than he felt. "If it fails, it's because you didn't listen to the person who built it from the ground up. And I'm not here to let it fail." For a heartbeat, the room was silent. Then Mr. Weller nodded slowly, the decision settling over him like the weight of an empire. "All right, Mr. Carver," he said. "You'll have a chance to prove it. We'll bring you on as a lead engineer for this project. But know this isn't charity. You're going to be held to the same standard as everyone else in this room." Liam met his gaze and gave a small, resolute nod. "That's all I've ever wanted," he said. "The chance to show what I can do." As the meeting dissolved into murmurs and side conversations, Liam felt a shiver of relief wash over him. He had done it. He'd forced them to see him, to recognize the value he brought. But as he gathered his laptop and notes, he knew this was only the beginning. The real work was just ahead, and he would have to prove himself every single day. But for the first time, he didn't feel like the soft-spoken friend of a delivery driver. He felt like the man who had built something that no one could laugh away. Liam walked out of the boardroom feeling the weight of what had just happened settling around him like a new skin. The hallways of Keston Industries seemed different now, the chatter of executives no longer a distant world he couldn't touch. As he moved through the lobby, he felt the eyes of strangers on him, the curious glances of people who suddenly knew his name. But beyond the recognition, a quiet storm was brewing in his gut. Doubt and determination warring for control as he thought about the days to come. He knew this was just the beginning. And beginnings, he had learned, were the hardest part. The next morning, Liam sat in a sleek conference room surrounded by men and women whose job titles carried weight like anvils. He'd been given a temporary badge, but the lanyard felt foreign against his skin. At the head of the table, Mr. Weller outlined the project timeline with crisp authority, his words slicing through the room with precision. Liam sat straighter than he felt, his backpack by his chair like a shield. Every word was another reminder that this was real now, his work, his responsibility, and his chance to prove that he wasn't just a fluke of luck and timing. But not everyone in the room was ready to welcome him. Across from him, Marcus, one of the senior engineers with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue, leaned back in his chair, his gaze cool and dismissive. "We're all aware of Mr. Carver's contribution," Marcus said, his voice smooth as ice. "But let's not kid ourselves. A single schematic doesn't make him an engineer, and it certainly doesn't make him part of this team." Liam felt the words like a slap, but he kept his face steady, his hands resting calmly on the table. He had expected this. He had braced himself for it. Mr. Weller didn't look at Marcus, his eyes still fixed on the roadmap he'd sketched on the whiteboard. "We're here because of Mr. Carver's design," he said, his voice measured but firm. "We'll see what else he can do in the days ahead. But we won't waste time second-guessing him." Liam let out a slow breath, a flicker of relief in his chest. But he could feel the weight of Marcus's stare, the challenge in it. He would have to prove himself again and again, not just to earn their trust, but to keep it. After the meeting, Liam was given a small workspace in the corner of the engineering floor, a cubicle with a window that looked out over the city, the skyline stretching like a promise he couldn't ignore. He set up his laptop, the familiar scuff marks on the keys grounding him in the middle of this world of polished desks and gleaming screens. Around him, the hum of activity was a constant reminder that he was no longer working in the shadows of his tiny apartment. This was real, and it was his. Joe called him that evening, his voice crackling through the phone with excitement. "So, how's the big leagues treating you?" he asked. Liam leaned back in his chair, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "It's different," he said. "Intense. But I think I can handle it." Joe laughed, the sound bright and familiar. "You're damn right you can. Just don't let those suits talk circles around you. You're the one who made this happen." Liam's smile widened. "Thanks, Joe, for everything." They said their goodbyes, and as Liam hung up, he felt a small measure of the weight on his shoulders lift. The days that followed were a blur of meetings and tests, of long hours spent poring over data and refining every detail of his design. Liam found himself surrounded by minds as sharp as his own, each one a flurry of questions and challenges that forced him to dig deeper than he ever had before. There were moments when he stumbled, when the complexity of the corporate world threatened to swallow him whole. But each time he found his footing, he felt that flicker of quiet pride grow a little brighter. Yet the resistance never fully vanished. Marcus made sure of that, his cutting remarks a constant reminder that not everyone believed in Liam's place at the table. "You're clever, I'll give you that," Marcus said one evening as they reviewed the latest test data. "But don't think a single breakthrough makes you a miracle worker." Liam met his gaze, calm but unwavering. "I'm not here to be a miracle," he said softly. "I'm here to do the work. And I won't stop until it's done." Marcus's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing more. In that silence, Liam felt a small victory. Each day ended with Liam returning to his small apartment, the space that had once felt like a prison, now a haven of quiet reflection. He would sit at his desk long after the city had gone dark, tweaking designs and running simulations, driven by the memory of that first dismissal and the promise he had made to himself and its echo. He knew the stakes were higher now, that every mistake could cost him everything. But he also knew that he was ready. Ready to prove that his mind was as valuable as any title, any pedigree, any polished resume. By the end of the week, the first prototype built from his design was ready for testing. Liam watched as the team gathered around it, the hum of anticipation thick in the air. The room fell silent as the machine powered on, the software of its core unit a whisper of possibility. Liam's breath caught as the data streamed in clean, precise, everything he had promised. When the test ended, the room erupted in quiet applause, even Marcus offering a nod of begrudging respect. Liam allowed himself a small smile, his chest light with the knowledge that this was just the beginning. The day of the product launch dawned bright and sharp, The city outside Keston Industries alive with the promise of possibility. Liam stood in the lobby, his temporary badge replaced with a sleek new one that bore his name and title, Lead Engineer. He ran his thumb over the lettering, the weight of it both humbling and exhilarating. He had fought for every inch of this place, every moment of recognition, and now he stood ready to watch his work take flight. Around him, the energy of the company crackled like a live wire, executives in tailored suits, engineers with eyes that gleamed with anticipation, assistants hustling to make sure every detail was perfect. As he made his way to the presentation hall, Liam passed by Joe, who was setting up a display of the old delivery van in the corner, a nod to how far they had both come. Joe caught Liam's eye and gave him a wink, his grin wide and proud. "Look at you, Mr. Big Shot," he teased. Liam laughed, the sound quiet but genuine. "Couldn't have done it without you," he said, his voice low. Joe just nodded, his expression softening. "You did it, Liam. You made them see." Those words settled around Liam's shoulders like a cloak of quiet strength. Inside the hall, the seats were filling quickly, investors and clients and curious onlookers, all waiting for the moment that would define the future of Keston Industries. The stage was set with sleek banners and a massive screen that glowed with the company's logo. Liam took his place beside Mr. Weller, the CEO's nod of greeting more genuine now than it had ever been. "This is your moment, Mr. Carver," he said. "You've earned it." Liam inclined his head, the nerves in his stomach coiling tight but steady. "Thank you, sir," he said simply. As the lights dimmed and the hush fell over the room, Mr. Weller stepped forward, his voice calm and confident as he spoke of innovation and resilience, of the power of fresh ideas and the courage it took to see them through. Then he turned to Liam, his hand outstretched. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice ringing clear, "meet the engineer behind our breakthrough, the man whose design has become the cornerstone of our future." The applause that rose around him was thunderous, but Liam felt only a deep, quiet calm as he stepped forward, his prototype glimmering on the screen behind him. He spoke with a quiet authority, his voice steady as he walked the room through the evolution of the design, the sleepless nights, the careful tests, the endless refining that had shaped every curve and line. He didn't tell them about the laughter in the boardroom that first day, or the doubt that had nearly stopped him before he'd even begun. Those memories were his alone, the fuel that had driven him to this moment. Instead, he focused on the data, the potential, the promise of what they could build together if they dared to believe in ideas that didn't come from polished boardrooms or pedigreed schools. As he spoke, he felt the room leaning in, the weight of their attention a living thing that thrummed through his veins. When he finished, there was a beat of silence, then a swell of applause that washed over him like a tide. Liam took it in, his chest swelling with a pride that was sharp and sweet all at once. He met Joe's eyes across the room and saw the tears there, the way his friend's smile shone brighter than any spotlight. In that moment, he felt more seen than he ever had in his life. In the days that followed, the prototype moved from the stage to the factory floor, each test and tweak a step forward into a future he had once only dreamed of. Liam worked side by side with the engineers who had once doubted him, the quiet respect that grew between them forged in the fires of challenge and proof. Marcus, the last holdout, finally approached him one evening as the last of the staff filed out, his voice low but sincere. "You were right," he said simply. "We needed your perspective. I was wrong to doubt you." Liam just nodded, the words settling in his chest like a bomb. At night, Liam would sit by the window of his apartment, the city lights a soft glow against the glass. He thought of the laughter that had once haunted him, the dismissal that had nearly driven him back into silence. But those voices felt distant now, like echoes of a life he had outgrown. In their place was the quiet certainty of what he had built, of who he had become. The soft-spoken friend of a delivery driver no longer hid in the shadows of someone else's dream. He had claimed his own place, and he knew he would never let it go. The final product was unveiled in a private ceremony for the engineers and developers who had brought it to life. As they gathered around the gleaming unit, its polished surface reflecting the lights of the factory floor. Liam felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Mr. Weller, his expression thoughtful. "You've given this company a future, Liam," he said quietly. "And you've shown us that innovation doesn't always come from the places we expect." Liam nodded, his voice steady. "Sometimes," he said, "the best ideas come from the quietest voices." And so, in that bright, humming factory, surrounded by the men and women who had finally come to see him for who he was, Liam Carver felt the weight of everything he had built settle into something lighter, a promise, a new beginning. He knew the road ahead would still be full of challenges, that doubt would always lurk at the edges of every new idea. But he also knew that he had faced it before, and he would face it again. Because now, he was no longer just a soft-spoken friend in the background. He was an inventor, an engineer, and a man who had turned a moment of laughter into a future no one could deny. If you found Liam's journey as inspiring as we did, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video, and tell us in the comments what quiet ideas you're working on that the world needs to hear. Thanks for watching.